In the United States, one group of military planners had long believed there was an alternative to invading Japan. It was called strategic bombing. This involved carefully targeted bombing raids designed to destroy Japan's infrastructure, industry, and ability to wage war. But in the first years of the Pacific War, there was a problem. Japan lay beyond the range of America's bombs. In April 1942, the US had managed to launch a one-off bombing raid on Tokyo. But it had pushed the bombers to their limits and was never a practical long-term option. Then, in early 1944, the Boeing Aircraft Corporation produced a revolutionary new heavy bomber, the B-29 Superfortress. It could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs over a range of 3,250 miles. Suddenly, Japan was just about in reach of America's forward bases in the Pacific. In summer 1944, 9 months before the assault on Iwo Jima, US B-29 stationed at Chengdu in southwest China began a series of strategic bombing raids on Japan. But range was still an issue. It was too far for a fighter escort, so the superfortresses had to fly alone, staying at high altitude for their own safety. Even then, the range was only just within limits, and there was no room for navigational error. Many of the bombs missed their targets. Then in July 1944, there was a development that gave strategic bombing a new lease of life. The US Navy captured the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific. They were only 1,500 miles from the Japanese homeland. This was well within the B-29's operating range. The odds for a successful bombing campaign on Japan had dramatically improved. On November the 24th, over 100 superfortresses took off from the Marianas. Their target? The Nakajima Aircraft Factory in Tokyo. But only 48 bombs struck anywhere near the target. For 3 months, more raids targeted other industrial sites. But the B-29s were still flying without a fighter escort and still dropping their bombs from high altitude. The targets were often obscured by cloud, and jet stream winds made accurate bomb aiming impossible. To make matters worse, the B-29 suffered from engine problems. There were also attacks from kamikaze pilots. By the winter of 1944, it was clear that strategic bombing was just not working. If Japan was to be bombed into submission, the US would have to come up with something else. So it was that on December the 18th, 1944, America tried a new tactic. 84 B-29s set off from Chengdu for Japanese-occupied Hankow on the Yangtze River. They flew much lower than usual and carried mostly incendiary rather than high explosive bombs. Hankow was devastated. The raid was more effective than almost any of the previous strategic bombing raids. The US appeared to have found a way forward: firebombing at low altitude. The US bomber commander in the Marianas, General Curtis LeMay, now ordered the systematic firebombing of Japan. It was the same tactic that Britain had employed in Germany. On the evening of March the 9th, 1945, Pathfinder aircraft roared over Tokyo, dropping incendiary target indicators. The fires they started marked the aiming points for almost 300 B-29s. Coming in at just 5,000 feet, they dropped over 2,000 tons of incendiary bombs. The flimsy wooden houses stood no chance. Air was sucked in, creating towering firestorms which raced faster than people could run. The glow from the burning city could be seen over 150 miles away. When the all clear finally sounded the following morning, 16 square miles of Tokyo had been obliterated. Over 100,000 of its citizens were killed and 1 million made homeless. Tokyo was not the only city to face this devastating new tactic. Nagoya was set ablaze 2 nights later. Then Osaka and Kobe during the following week. Firestorms engulfed whole areas, destroying houses and industrial facilities. But American success was coming at a price. Without escorts, the low-flying US bombers were dangerously vulnerable to Japanese fighters. American losses now mounted. If the bombing campaign was ever to succeed, the US needed bases even closer to Japan. Within weeks, Iwo Jima fell. Now, at last, the US Air Force not only had a base for its bombers within easy striking distance of Japan, it could finally use its Mustang fighters to escort them. During the late spring and early summer of 1945, strikes of up to 500 bombers attacked Japan every other day. Once the largest industrial areas had been crippled, LeMay moved on to lesser targets. Yet, in the face of catastrophic damage and an appalling death toll, the Japanese showed no sign of cracking. It finally dawned on the Americans that strategic bombing alone was never going to defeat Japan. It looked like a full-scale invasion of the country was becoming inevitable.